Well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Well, another classic ticked off the list, another one of the top 100 Hollywood films of all time, and another film that I probably in my life should have seen before now, but I've done it. I have seen 1985's The Breakfast Club. It's interesting because I have had lots of conversations about, I suppose, the theatrical adaptation, and even in this year, in this project, I have covered several films that are what might one describe as stage play cinema, where it's something like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom or One Night in Paris or even Chicago. You get that sense that, okay, these were adaptations of stage shows, and on some level the director wanted to retain that sense of the theatrical. Now, some directors completely deconstruct theatre adaptations and then rebuild them so that you no longer feel that history of theatre, and it becomes just a true adaptation, I suppose, where it is purely a cinema driven narrative. And watching The Breakfast Club, I genuinely, for a long period of the film, believed that this was one of these occasions, that it felt like something that was a theatrical production that was then taken to cinema. But that's not the case. And I understand why it's lauded, and I understand, in terms of sort of the fundamentals of cinema, why this film decided to go for such a stripped down, simple construction of storytelling and character. Because you'd have thought that by the 80s, this kind of story would be too late. That cinema, you know, with the Spielbergs and even John Hughes' other works, you have that sense of scale and wonderment, and the idea of having this very intimate character piece that is practically one setting with, you know, a cast of 7 people, essentially, not including a couple of sort of smaller roles, but 7, you know, the 5 kids, the janitor and the principal. There is something very, very raw about it. Very, as I say, if it was the case that this was had been a stage adaptation made for cinema, I could see a producer saying, well, is there any way we can flesh this out and make it, you know, give it more, you know, add more scenes and build it up? Because it is, like I say, it's kept as this character piece. And it's, you know, we have these long monologues with characters, or, you know, fairly lengthy scenes for a cinema, for a feature film, you know, where feature films tend to have fairly short scenes, particularly dialogue scenes. They don't tend to linger on these lengthy conversations that barely cut away from that particular conversation. But I suppose the beauty of it is within the fact that it can be done. That John Hughes decided to give us these 5 archetypal characters and almost deconstruct the high school experience. And on some level, at least in terms of Hollywood cinema, by deconstructing it, it almost defined it for the next 35 years. That now, you know, the sort of archetypical jock, nerd, waster, princess and weirdo, you know, those characters, I struggle to believe that before Breakfast Club, there was such a vivid idea of what those characters were. I might be wrong, maybe they were, but I feel like it was an 80s construction, and I feel like this might have hugely contributed to the people's idea of what those character types were, or at least reimagined them for the modern era, to a point where I almost wish there was. I mean, we have films like 21 Jump Street that do have sort of recontextualized the high school experience, or films like Mean Girls, or more modern so films that do try and reconstruct the idea of the high school experience, as it applies to kids now. And yet, the legacy of Breakfast Club is so overarching that you still see it. You still see the character types, and when you see a new television series or film set in a high school, they fall back on these templates that are at least derived from these character types. And it is such a strong piece because I struggle to think of films that really gave so much airtime to the teenage experience before this, that spent so much, gave teenagers the platform to, or at least characters, characters that are teenagers, the platform to, be the focus of a film where we try to get a deeper understanding of their experience and their understanding of the world. And I think, the 80s was that period, between this and Back to the Future. You really get that sense that the 80s was the high school era where, teenagers were king in cinema. And I think it's interesting because this probably was the period in which, we started to appreciate that teenagers were more psychologically and emotionally complex. They aren't children, but they're not adults. And they're trying, and the whole rebellion narrative that had previously, it had existed, but it mostly applied to slightly older, 18 plus characters. You could push it back and go, well, surely 16, 17-year-olds also felt that same, those same ideas of identity and social construct and social pressures. And I suppose there is that sort of fatale aspect that I bang on about so much in these videos, about the fact that, our characters, particularly, well, exclusively fictional characters, destined to their fate because it's a narrative and therefore it's a fixed series of events. And when we look at tragic characters and character, heroic characters, there is a sense of, are they, if you go all the way back to Greek theatre, are they bound by fate to some degree because they must complete their predetermined story, whether that be within the reality of their storytelling device, and being led by, say, godlike figures, or the fact that, from a metatextual point of view, this is a written narrative, and they must complete, they must fire the Chekhov's gun. And what I like about this is the fact that this film, if this was a broader film about the high school experience and these characters, we saw these characters from beginning to end, you would think, yeah, well, they inevitably will become these types of people. But the film is more interested in taking a breath to have them self-examinate, and the idea that they, they look at themselves and say, is this all I can be? Am I predestined to become, you have characters like Andrew, who's like, am I predestined to become like my father and become this, obsessed with status and sport and, and the idea and the social pressure of that, and or a character like Claire, who's like, am I a princess? Am I bound by everyone else's expectations of what they think I am? Or conversely, a character like Bender, who, it's like, is he destined to become a criminal and have a hard life where things will not go well for him? And we're not, as a narrative, the point is not to answer that question, because we don't know. We don't know what happens to them beyond the story we are told. But we have to assume the answer is no, they are, or yes, I suppose, they are bound by their predestinations, and this is almost a stopgap, a moment for them to allow themselves to be something other than what is expected of them to be. You know, I mean, the whole conversation comes up where, you know, Brian said, well, would we be friends on Monday? And Claire says, well, no. There is, you know, and you feel the immense sense of tragedy to that, because even though you see them breaking the bonds and you know, bonding more than you would have expected by the end of the film, there is nothing to say that is, you know, for all we know, that is it, that was their bonding story, but there is no more for them than that. And it's, yeah, it's, you know, I suppose it's very good because it encapsulates the high school experience as understood at that time period, but at the same time, like any great narrative, there is a universality to it, and the school experience hasn't changed so much now that I think that people would identify, people who are at school now, I think would still identify with this kind of story, and I think that's what makes it great, that maybe in another 50 years, you know, unless there are some huge societal shifts in the nature of schools and the nature of sort of young adult lifestyles change, that there will be something within this that they identify with and we continue to identify with. And I think that's what's great about it, and I think that's what makes it timeless and important. And yeah, as I say, the sort of meta-text of it's sort of screaming out to me, because I'm thinking about things like, you know, 7 Characters in Search of an Author, because it's very much in that same mould. And the idea of, you know, sort of self-examination, and of course I appreciate that kind of storytelling, because I appreciate the ideas of, you know, arc and character and inevitability, and sort of breaking those preconceptions, and I think this film is desperately trying to do that, and I think that's what makes it so great. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.